Hello friends, Donat Requiescat here. Perhaps the most famous story and passage in all of philosophy is the Allegory of the Cave from Book 7 of Plato's Republic. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read it and I'm going to draw it out as I'm reading. And then afterwards, stick around, I'll give a little bit of commentary and some thoughts on it and how it relates to us today and what philosophy is all about. And now I said, let me show in a figure how far our nature is enlightened or unenlightened. Behold, human beings living in an underground den, which has a mouth open towards the light and reaching all along the den. Here they have been from their childhood, and have their legs and necks chained so that they cannot move, and can only see before them, being prevented by the chains from turning around their heads. Above and behind them a fire is blazing at a distance, and between the fire and the prisoners there is a raised way, and you will see, if you look, a low wall built along the way, like the screen which marionette players have in front of them, over which they show the puppets. I see. And do you see, I said, men passing along the wall carrying all sorts of vessels and statues and figures of animals made of wood and stone and various materials, which appear over the wall? Some of them are talking, others silent. You have shown me a strange image, and they are strange prisoners. Like ourselves, I replied, and they see only their own shadows, or the shadows of one another, which the fire throws on the opposite wall of the cave. True, he said. How could they see anything but the shadows if they never were allowed to move their heads? And of the objects which are being carried in like manner, they would only see the shadows? Yes, he said. And if they were able to converse with one another, would they not suppose that they were naming what was actually before them? Very true. And suppose further that the prison had an echo, which came from the other side. Would they not be sure to fancy, when one of the passers-by spoke, that the voice which they heard came from the passing shadow? No question, he replied. To them, I said, the truth would be literally nothing but the shadows of the images. That is certain. And now look again, and see what will naturally follow if the prisoners are released and disabused of their error. At first, when any of them is liberated and compelled suddenly to stand up and turn his neck round and walk and look towards the light, he will suffer sharp pains. The glare will distress him, and he will be unable to see the realities of which in his former state he had seen the shadows, and then conceives someone saying to him that what he saw before was an illusion, but that now, when he is approaching nearer to being and his eye is turned towards more real existence, he has a clearer vision. What will be his reply? And you may further imagine that his instructor is pointing to the objects as they pass and requiring him to name them. Will he not be perplexed? Will he not fancy that the shadows which he formerly saw are truer than the objects which are now shown to him? Far truer. And if he is compelled to look straight at the light, will he not have a pain in his eyes, which will make him turn away to take in the objects of vision which he can see, and which he will conceive to be in reality clearer than the things which are now being shown to him? True. And suppose once more that he is reluctantly dragged up a steep and rugged ascent, and held fast until he is forced into the presence of the sun himself. Is he not likely to be pained and irritated? When he approaches the light, his eyes will be dazzled, and he will not be able to see anything at all of what are now called realities. Not all in a moment, he said. He will require to grow accustomed to the light of the upper world, and first he will see the shadows best, next the reflections of men and other objects in the water, and then the objects themselves. Then he will gaze upon the light of the moon and the stars in the spangled heaven, and he will see the sky and the stars by night better than the sun or the light of the sun by day. Certainly. Last of all, he will be able to see the sun, and not mere reflections of him in the water, but he will see him in his own proper place and not in another, and he will contemplate him as he is. Certainly. He will then proceed to argue that this is he who gives the season and the years, and is the guardian of all that is in the visible world, and in a certain way the cause of all things which he and his fellows have been accustomed to behold. Clearly, he said, and he would first see the sun and then reason about him. And when he remembered his old habitation, and the wisdom of the den and his fellow prisoners, do you not suppose that he would felicitate himself on the change, and pity them? Certainly he would. And if they were in the habit of conferring honors among themselves on those who were quickest to observe the passing shadows and to remark which of them went before, and which followed after, and which were together, and who were therefore best able to draw conclusions as to the future, do you think that he would care for such honors and glories, or envy the possessors of them? Would he not say with Homer, better to be the poor servant of a poor master, and to endure anything, rather than think as they think, and do, and live after their manner? Yes, he said, and I think that he would rather suffer anything than entertain these false notions and live in this miserable manner. Imagine once more, I said, such an one coming suddenly out of the sun to be replaced in his old situation. Would he not be certain to have his eyes full of darkness? To be sure, he said. And if there were a contest, and he had to compete in measuring the shadows with the prisoners who had never moved out of the den, while his sight was still weak and before his eyes had become steady, and the time which would be needed to acquire this new habit of sight might be very considerable, would he not be ridiculous? Men would say of him that he went up and down, he came without his eyes, and that it was better not even to think of ascending. And if anyone tried to loose another, and lead him up to the light, they let them only catch the offender, and they would put him to death. So now you know why I'm not a professional artist, and I'm a physics teacher instead. First thing to notice is that as Socrates is talking, and he's the person talking mostly here, Plato had him as the person speaking, he says that the prisoners in the cave are like ourselves. Now, we are like the prisoners in the cave because we mostly operate without training based on our passions and prejudices and the passions and prejudices of the people around us. We're just responding to media and headlines and people that we're with and picking up on their ideas, whether or not they actually make any sense. But the process of philosophy is starting to question those ideas and look at things logically. Does this idea really make sense? Like Mortimer Adler said, the unexamined thought is not worth thinking. So we take those thoughts and we start to examine them. Does this really make sense? And it hurts sometimes, because sometimes we have to give up our old ways of thinking, we have to give up our old ideas. But ultimately, the goal is to reach and then see and contemplate reality itself. Just as the person in the cave is forced out of the cave and forced to look at things from a different perspective and really examine them, and then come out and slowly, one thing at a time, first looking at shadows, then at the objects at night, and then during the day, and then finally seeing the sun itself, which in the cave analogy is an idea of what Plato thought is the source of all reality, right? The essence of the good itself. So what we want to see as philosophers is what is the real nature of reality, and then to contemplate that reality. That's the goal of the philosopher, to see the truth, capital T truth. And if it is capital G goodness and capital B beauty, as it was for Plato, all the better, because then our goal will be to contemplate true beauty and true goodness, right? And truth itself. And that's what it means to be a philosopher, a lover of that kind of wisdom. And so I hope that you are on that journey with me, seeking truth and loving truth and doing whatever it takes to find it.